Presently, we already have our first keynote speaker online with us. Is the person of Mr. Babatunde Salawu. Is the head of internal control and compliance of Helicrate Agro Allied Industry Limited. He's also a fellow ICANN, an associate member of CTTN, Masters in Policy and Strategies Studies. He started his working career in course account. Mr. Salawu Babatunde is a speaker, faculty member of AC Professional and CTN Tax Academy as of governance. So he's also traveled widely and spoken widely on different matters related to economy. And we believe his input today will help us to start our discussion on the economy of the nation and our investment in education. Without wasting our time, I'd like to invite Mr. Babatunde Salawu online. We'll be listening to him. Everyone online, please, let's listen to the first keynote, and everyone on site, please, let's listen to our first keynote speaker. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Babatunde Smith. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can, sir.
We can hear you loudly, sir. We can hear you. Something has happened.
Program, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. I sincerely want to appreciate the effort of a Fresh Foundation. Well, I would say it's NGO for their advocacy and propagating education to a greater level in our nation, which is Nigeria. Well, without much ado, because of the time, we have so much activities. Well, we all know that education in Nigeria is a very key and very important sector that we all know that government is doing wonderfully well, but not as desired or as desirable as we want it to be. But we all know that education is key in every facet of our lives, both at rural level or at urban level. And we all know the attention we parents pays into education, right from the kindergarten to primary education, to secondary education, then tertiary education, then to vocational by an extension. So we all know that Nigeria is a major key stakeholder in Africa and a major contributor of economies of African as a whole. It's a country in sub-Saharan African, and we all know that education is given much attention to, because education is part of our society, is part of things that takes us beyond. It's a part of future security for us and for our children. Quite different from what some people have it, that education is a gateway to wealth or wherever, but I strongly disagree with that. But education is to provide a security for one as individual and as a body or as society. Well, we all know that we have a lot of statistics as regards education in Nigeria or in Africa. Like we all know that we still have a lot of where to get to, but where we are, we need to look at where we are coming from. According to IMF, we have the statistics shows that 3 out of 10 children do not attend school, and we need to look at this. And out of even those 7 that attend school, about 65% of them, complete their schools, complete their schools activities. So, and the benchmark we are looking at should be 87%, which is a minimum threshold that the IMF is really suggesting. But we know that government spending on education is growing, but growing in terms of numeric figure or the fund that is being accruable to education. But we are looking at what are the commensurable growth in the numbers of enrollment, in the numbers of the quality of education that we have is what we need to know. But according to GDP, the education ratio should be, or rate should be minimum of 4% for any growing economy. Like for instance, in Nigeria, in 2024, we can say that, well, the present administration is paying a good credence to education to ensure that education is taking is getting a maximum attention. At least we have close to 8%, about 7.9 precisely of budgets in Nigerian budget as annual budget of 2024 allotted to education, which is in the region of 2.18 trillion naira. That is top there is next to defense security, which goes close to maybe 2 point something trillion naira. But that's not where we are going. We need to discuss on the issues that are militating against growth in education, despite these huge funds or resources that have been allocated for this. Of course, we all know that funding is a major issue. One thing is to have this bogus amount of implementation aspect of it is another area that has been a kind of a humongous problem. So to education being dwindling or being not getting to our desirable level. Of course, we need to look at the various sector. We have we all know that Ministry of Education anchors the education itself in Nigeria, trickle down to states and down to local governments. Yeah, we all know that most of all these funds are being, disbursed from the federal down to the local government. But how efficient do we have this funding? How efficient utilization of this funding, or how sufficiency do we have for this funding? So those are the things, one of the things that we have to, look at. Then we need to look at our government. We need to look at their political will to be able to put education as a priority, a major priority. They are the major stakeholders in this sector, in this enterprise of education business. And as such, there must be a political will for this. Oh, sorry. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So we need to look at the political will on the part of our governments. We need to look at grassroots problem. We need to look at the accessibility. There are a lot of hamlets, villages, a lot of settlements that education is still very far away from. So we need to look at grassroots development. How do we have grassroots development is through state government and through this local government engagement and empowerment of local government. So that political will has to, has to grow from the federal government to the state government by ensuring that the local government are being given a proper and adequate funding to reach out to some of all these local areas that have been disenfranchised or that are not accessible to education. particularly rural areas. So we need to look at that as well. The political will on the part of the government. Then there's a need for for most of these our educational stakeholders, particularly at the university, to engage more on a lot of researches and a lot of things that can really improve on our education. How do we do this? We can only do this through by encouragement of researchers in the institution, by providing adequate funding for them to see the better way we can really help in the education sector. Just to complement what the Fresh Foundation is doing, you can see it's a lot of enormous program, because education is requires a lot of capital deployment, and which we all know that we need assistance from every stakeholder, the government, the NGO, even from foreign institutions as well. So then another area we need to look at, how do we ensure that there's sustainability in some of all these policies, programs, and funding, to ensure that there's no disruptions in our academic activities, both at primary institutions, at secondary, and at higher institutions. Then another area which we have to look at, governments must be involved to ensure that we thank God that education has grown to a point of liberalization, a point of flexibility, where private investors can really come into. And we can see the result that there's a growth in the number of enrollment, quite unlike before, though as a result of growth in population. So we need to look at how government can bring the cost of education down. And the only way is by engagement. You cannot give what you don't have. Of course, the private institutions are readily available. Of course, they are there as an investor. And as an investor, you agree with me that they need to get is for economic reasons, to get profit out of it. So they will have to look at their cost. They have to levy on school fees. They have to at exorbitant price, to ensure that the forces of demand and supplies comes in. So we need to look at how government should bring in the cost of education down by full engagement, by subsidizing, by intervention. Then another area we have to look at as one of the issues of education in Nigeria is how constant are we reviewing our curriculum to reflect what is acceptable, or a kind of international standard. So we need to look at what government is doing in that regard, how to ensure that our curriculum is in tandem with what is the reality, and what is the present reality that we have, in tandem with other climates, probably international international standard, to meet up or to reflect international standard. Then we need to constantly be looking at peer review mechanism. Let us look at how we are doing things. Okay, this is Nigeria. How do they do it in other parts of the world, to ensuring that we are not behind? For instance, we have various facets of education in Nigeria. We cannot rule out Almajiris. We cannot rule out the areas that are being agitating against education. We readily mentioned one of them, which is around our corner, which is the Boko Haram. Resistance and prevention of education to survive in that area. So what do we need to do? What we need to galvanize our Western education to ensure that it reaches to nooks and crannies of every society in Nigeria. We need to do peer review and see how it works. Yes, if what they want is Almighty education, let's see how we can modernize it, how we can see it working in that kind of environment. So we need to do a kind of peer review mechanism. Then another area I want us to look at, the civil education, civic education, that I say is part of the curriculum. But in those days, we used to have what you call moral instruction. And I think I want to implore Fresh to really push in for more advocacy on moral education. Moral education is dwindling. I must confess this. Moral education is fast dwindling, and that is why we can see the prevalence of Yahoo in coming up in our society. A lot of banditry, a lot of things that are immoral coming up. And do we say that it is the fault of the curriculum or is it the fault of the institution? No and yes, but I think it's fast depleting. We need to institutionalize moral education, which I think should be harnessed into civic education. I also want to talk about the implication of all this that we have in our society. One, we need to look at failure to fund education is an appeal for growth of illiteracy. We need to look at this, which is an area we need to nip in the bud. We have to continue to sensitize with a government or stakeholders to ensure that proper and adequate funding is given to education to ensure that we don't go back to the old time that we have growth number of illiteracy. Of course, the literacy in Nigeria is still worrisome, but we all know that it can grow to a point of desirable. Like, for instance, you cannot see a roadside mechanic or a roadside organizer not desiring to sponsor his wards or children for education. No. You say very few of them want their children to take after the job they are doing. No, a typical average Nigerian, whether educated or not educated, will want to give birth to give basic education to this world. So we need to look at that, and we need to look at the enrollment. How do we see enrollment growing? It can grow through what I said earlier on, that there should be a support for the local government, because we have three tiers of government. We have federal, we have the state, and we have local. But I want to say that most states in Nigeria are lacking in this area by disenfranchising the local government. Local government are being harnessed as part of states, and the autonomy that they used to have their own push to some of all these local and rural areas is not there, because once local government is not funded accordingly, that they don't have autonomous, there's no way they can really be able to perform their statutory responsibility. And one of their responsibilities is this local government SUBEB, that they also reach out to the primary schools, the secondary schools in their locality. They are closer to the communities, they are closer to the chiefs, they are closer to the village heads, to rural heads, to the communities, and closing with them indicates that they are aware of most of the problems that are militating against these schools, in terms of schools materials, in terms of infrastructures, buildings, laboratory, and some other things, learning equipment that are needed by this school. So we need to look at that, and by the time there is a kind of support for this, there could be a lot of enrollment that will be heightened in that regard. Then we need to look at a high rate of dropout. But we need to look at this because of those factors we have mentioned: accessibility and cost of education. Of course, this leads to a lot of things. We all know dropout leads to a lot of things: banditry, robbery, and Yahoo syndrome, and kidnapping. And all these vices are as a result of when you keep children out of streets and you put them in education, there won't be that high propensity for dropout or for all these societal vices, such as robbery and Yahoo syndrome that I mentioned earlier. Then, of course, there will be a quench for juvenile delinquencies in the society. And of course, the more attention we pay to education, the more dwindling some all of these vices we have. Then, of course, we need to look at the quality of our education as well, which is very important. Yes, one thing is to look at the education. One thing is to fund it, another thing is to look at the quality. And the quality starts from proper funding, the quality, getting the best teachers, get the best curriculum and equipment. Of course, to whom much is given, much is given. And at the same time, there should be a lot of welfareism for the schools and the teachers. So we need to look at these things, how it contributes to the economy. Of course, education, there's no alternative to education. We have a lot of take home from it in the society. One of it is higher productivity. Once we have large turnout of societies, our children's in the school, there'll be a lot of productivity in the long run. Of course, it enhances human capital development, and there will be a lot of assurance for labor force to contend with rapid growth in technology, education, rapid agings in the world. So by the time we have investment in education, we are going to have a lot of advantages that plays itself out. Of course, technology and creativity through research and development will come into the society, and skill and knowledge acquisition is there to be able to impact into the society. Those are the things I can say about the few ones I can remember as a benefit for education investment. But now, the issue is, how do we see that education is giving attention, adequate funding in our society, particularly in Nigeria? One of it is from the top, which is the government, who is the father of all, the federal government. There must be a policy direction mandating every tier of government, may it be state and local government, that a particular proportion of their budget should be allocated for education, not for the budgets. And in doing so, there must be a correspondent cash backing for some of all these things, not by a conjectural pronouncement or policy, but there should be a kind of a backup, a serious backup from the government, implementation aspect of it through cash backing, to ensure that most of all these educational programs are well germane, are well implemented, and well funded. Of course, there should be a monitoring from that angle. That is from the state, that is from the federal, down to state and to to local government. So education must be given high level of priority. Like as we have now, of course, we have a world or UN, United Nations benchmark for education, that is the allocation of budget for education as far as the United Nations is concerned. I say that relatively we don't work towards that direction, but I think the government in place is really looking into that direction. Then another area we need to look at is I'm talking of a higher learning, because I've not been mentioning higher learning since I'm talking of a university, is a decentralization. I think decentralization is a method that will really help our funding, particularly in education. What do you mean by decentralization? I'm talking about, we need to see a kind of ownership, control, decentralization of control to some of all these institutions in Nigeria by looking at the ownership. Like, for instance, most of these federal universities that are owned by federal government, I think the government can come up with an idea of cascading the ownership down to states as well. Maybe ownership of federal government and state government. I have seen a lot of state universities that have been very, very well in Nigeria. They don't go on strike. They pay very well. They have a very good standard library, laboratory, and they have a sustainable plan for their education. So I think federal government can borrow leave with this. They are too much for government to issue. We have federal university, and that is why funding is not coming readily the way it should. Of course, we have what we call TED fund, which is taken from education fund, but which I still believe that is still not adequate. And that is why there's a need for private involvement in some of all these sectors. Of course, private investments will come with costs. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, government should be able to look at decentralizing it, so let them be a part ownership. Let state be part of ownership. For instance, in Unzuka, we have Nigeria of UNN there. Government can partner with the state there, have the ownership, diffuse the ownership, and let there be a contribution from the state and the federal government to ensure that we have adequate funding in university. So decentralization of university autonomy is very key, particularly for those that are owned by federal university. I also want to talk about the autonomous that should be given to university. To some of our universities, which we all know that university is a ivory tower, is the height, the apogee or the height of learning. That's the peak. We all believe that most of all these our professors should be encouraged to carry out their research. They should be able to fund them to be able to see the university environment as a place, a glorious environment, a glorious community, not the way Nigeria in the past years has been taking university education. We can see funding as part of it. Let them be granted an autonomous to generate their revenue in form of IGR, apart from the federal allocation. I believe that if most of all these universities are granted that autonomy or they are given that leverage to be able to look inward, develop a lot of cottage industries within the university environment, I believe that it is going to support the federal allocation that comes to them. We can see some universities in Nigeria, even private university. I've seen some university that when you get there, whatever they use there, the consumptions in that particular school belongs to that school. They have cottage industries, firms that are grown in that industry, like sachet water, bottled water, even some industry printing. So they can have a venture into it such a way that they have a lot of money. We have a lot of foreign universities that are self-sustaining. They rely less from the federal government or from the state government. So I think we have a lot of things to show, a lot of things at the end of the government from the various stakeholders, particularly the federal, the state government, and the local government, to ensure that education is taken to an enviable position in this country. We can see that Nigeria is rich. Yes, we have a lot of money, a lot of investment. NGO deploy resources into our education, but we still need more to do to ensure that most of all these things are efficiently and effectively utilized. We all know that Nigerians deserve better, and we can move from the rating that we have been given presently down, that is the bottom, we can go up to the ladder. We can climb the ladder to be one of the best countries that have educational programs in Africa and by extension and in the world. Thank you, Mr. Babatunde, the listeners.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Babatunde Salawu. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
this in-depth analysis of different angles to the Nigerian education issues. We say thank you again to you, sir. That's our first keynote speech for this Education Stakeholders Conference.